Hey, everybody. Pastor Jared here. I hope you're doing well today. I'm here with Pastor Josh and Pastor Benny, and we're about to get into our next segment of a question and answer time. Over the last couple of days, you've been submitting questions for us, and we've taken the time just to talk about those questions amongst ourselves, and now we want to give you some answers. Um, we know right now, in the middle of this social distancing period, we're all at home. So we hope that you can watch this and be encouraged with your family. And our prayer is that this time and this video would spark conversations between you and your families and your kids. And it would point you to scripture and what God has to say about some of these very important topics. So again, feel free to comment on this thread. Give us your thoughts as well. And we look forward to sharing this time with you. So with that said, let's get into answering some questions.
So I'm going to answer this question. This comes from a young man named Brent, and it's for Pastor Josh. He asked, "What is your favorite biblical character? Who is your favorite Pokemon character? And who would win if they battled one another?" So Brent, I've been thinking about this. So my son plays Pokemon. I play with him sometimes. So my favorite biblical character right now is Moses. But I don't think I would want Moses to go into battle. So I'm going to choose the Archangel Michael as my favorite character. I think my favorite Pokemon is it's the Fire and Ice Dragon, because he has a lot of health, and he actually it incurs a lot of damage on others. So between the Fire and Ice Dragon Pokemon and the Archangel, the head angel of the Lord of Host army, I'm going to have to go on the side of God here. And I'm pretty sure that Michael would win the war. And often against good and evil, good always wins because of Christ and his victory. So, Brett, that would be my answer in the Pokemon.
Okay, so if you were not going into battle, though, who would be your favorite character? Would it be Moses?
Yeah, I think it's Moses right now. I mean, I'm reading and praying through Deuteronomy, getting ready for that. And Moses is he sees all these miracles. He experiences the burning bush, the parting of the Red Sea. Sees God bring quail down and manna from heaven. He gets frustrated and breaks the 10 Commandments. I mean, I don't know how bad your day was, but that's a pretty bad day to break the original 10 Commandments. And yet he finds forgiveness. But then he also dies on the edge of the promised land because of his sin. So I think Moses encapsulates just every end of humanity for all of us, the highs and the lows. So I think for me, that's a great question for you guys also. Who would be your favorite biblical character?
Yeah, for me, I think it goes back and forth depending on like where I'm at or what I'm studying. So right now I'm reading through Genesis. So Abraham is just number one for me right now. But just his faith and when God calls him to sacrifice Isaac, and he follows and with his faith, and for me with a 2-year-old daughter, putting myself in that position, it's kind of just mind blowing to me. So right now, Abraham is just the guy that I'm kind of focused on. So,
Benny, who would be your favorite character, your biblical character?
I'm going to go with Elisha, because Elisha and us, we have something in common, and that is Elisha was bald headed because, according to Second Kings, there was a bunch of, it says, youths or teenagers were making fun of him. And they were saying, "Go up, you old bald head, go up, you old bald head." And he called down 2 she bears out of the woods. And according to the Bible, it said that the she bears mauled 42 youths. So I'm kind of thinking that maybe me and Elisha have something in common.
Have you ever called down she bears on your youth?
Not yet. I'm kind of just waiting to see. Nobody's told me to go up your old bald head yet. So
that story always fascinated me.
So what about New Testament?
Okay. So New Testament, yeah, I think so for personal reflection, it would be Paul. Paul's writings have impacted me over and over. Paul's in jail writing. I know what it is to have plenty. I know what it is to have want, but and all things, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength in Philippians. And so Paul is the one who theologically has impacted me spiritually. But I think I most identify with Peter. So I think on a personal level, and I was there in Israel on the shore where they believe that Jesus restores Peter 3 times. And what a powerful moment to be on that shore thinking, God, how many times do I have to come to you? And you always meet me with kindness and mercy in my moment. So for that, Peter would be a personal favorite of mine, just because I see the personal growth and struggles of a man of God. So that would be mine. Benny, how about New Testament?
I'm probably a fan of Luke in the Gospels, and just because of his description to me always seems to speak to me. He speaks a lot about the people being amazed, and I think I fall in line with that, because I'm always amazed at the great things that God can do. I mean, so many times I can only do so much, but then you put things in God's hands or in His control, and then He seems to amaze me by the way that He kind of answers the prayer or takes care of the situation. So I'm a Dr. Luke fan.
Yeah, the same. One of my favorite Gospels. Jared, New Testament here.
Yeah. So I definitely would say Paul as well. Basically, Romans is probably my favorite book of the Bible, but, Paul basically through the New Testament writes the theology of the new covenant, so for me, I think it would definitely say Paul. My favorite verse, or one of them, is Romans 1:16, that says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of salvation to all who believe. So in the New Testament, it would definitely be Paul.
And we're not discounting Jesus, by the way, right? All of us would
right.
say, if you only could choose one character, that is the Messiah.
Right. I thought we weren't allowed to use Jesus.
He's our hero.
So here's a question from Danny Wages, and he says specifically for Brother Burnham. So that's me, I guess. So the question is, why were the high priest ordering the people to beat Jesus to death when the Roman chief, so Pilate, specifically found him not guilty and said not to beat him to death? So, Danny, that's a fantastic question. I think I'll take lead on this. So the high priest Caiaphas was part of, during this time, the Sadducees. Now, the Sadducees were a Jewish population that we don't have much in the Bible as far as historical background, but we know that every source that concerns the Sadducees is unsympathetic. There's not one single source, not New Testament, not Josephus, not rabbinic literature, that says good things about the Sadducees. So they claim they were descendants of the high priest Zadok, which means righteousness. The Sadducees did not believe in angels. They did not believe in the messianic ideas, who Jesus said he was the Messiah. They did not believe in the resurrection. They were wealthy, they were prominent, and they were politically connected. So, Danny, why do I give you all of that historical background? You see why the high priest at the time would not have encouraged someone who came and said, I am the Messiah, and then I will rise again. Jesus threatened everything that they held dear to their lives. And then you have the Roman side of this question. Why would Rome pronounce Christ innocent, which that's what Luke says especially, and then why would he still be crucified? So Roman execution was generally held for only slaves, prisoners of war, common criminals, army deserters, or later Christians who would not bow to King Caesar and not worship the God of Caesar's. So Danny, what you have is the Sadducees declared Jesus religiously guilty and blasphemous. So by their law, he should die, but they did not have the authority. The Romans declared by their legal authority that Jesus had not done anything. He was not a criminal. He was not a vagabond. He was not an army deserter. So legally, they did not see anything that held him guilty. So you have the religious guilt versus the legal guilt. ultimately Pilate decides that it is in Rome's best interest to crucify Jesus Christ. That way a riot will not break out. So he does not crucify Jesus because he's guilty. He crucifies him because he was being politically expedient. So that's why you have the varying tensions there. That's a phenomenal question, by the way. What a great biblical question. So another great question, other than the Bible, of course, what books and authors have helped shape you as you walk as a believer? So I'll give you guys time to think real quick. So I've already have noted Paul Tripp's Dangerous Calling. I also read Paul Tripp's daily devotion. His Mercies Made New every morning. Paul Tripp's just a great thought-provoking inspiration for me. Charles Spurgeon, an incredible pastor in London, so I read a lot of his books. Letters to Students is a great resource. And then also C.S. Lewis, The Weight of Glory, The Abolition of Man, of course, Mere Christianity, and even more than that, I think The Chronicles of Narnia has shaped my imagination around what Jesus has done in my life. So, Jared or Benny, what are some authors that have shaped you?
Yeah, I would say probably my favorite book other than the Bible is Holiness of God from R.C. Sproul. For me in my ministry, I would say it's Doxology and Theology from Matt Boswell. And then I love C.S. Lewis. Outside of Mere Christianity, probably my favorite book is Screwtape Letters. And then when I was in college, I read Don't Waste Your Life from John Piper. And that had a lot to do with my call to ministry, I would say. It was then that I decided that whatever it looked like, I was going to give my life for the sake of Christ in my community and the world. So that book really shaped me for sure.
I could read that book every year and probably should. Benny, what are some authors or some specific books that have shaped you?
Probably the biggest book, if I had to just say one of the biggest books I've ever read that I feel like has shaped my theology as well as my day-to-day interaction with the Holy Spirit is Donald S. Whitney's book, The Spiritual Disciplines. And even I have seen that really transform the lives of a lot of young men that were willing to sit down and make those 13 chapters or those disciplines become part of their lives in a daily routine. So I certainly have got to give him some kudos and credit there because there's a lot of meat in that book that is definitely help us in this walk of life that we're in.
Yeah, that's a great resource for anyone to pick up.
And I'm a C.S. Lewis fan also, and I love Spurgeon quotes. Matter of fact, I like a lot of his quotes more than his books. So a lot of times I love to read his quotes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And so again, we're asking our audience on Facebook, what is one author or one book that has shaped your life? It could be fiction, nonfiction, it could be Christian or non-Christian, but what is a book or author that God has used to shape your life and your spiritual growth? We would love to hear from you, and maybe that's something that can impact us or someone else who is listening right now. Here, another great question. What is your favorite podcast? So I have to them, but right now on my iPhone, you will find Mississippi State Boneyard with Steve Robertson. I always listen to that every other day, every third day. Leadership wise, I can't get enough of Patrick Lencioni. Just fantastic thought leader, team builder. Church for the Rest of Us by Jimmy Scroggins in Florida. Craig Groeschel Leadership Podcast. And so those are some of the leadership podcasts. So spiritual, you'll find on my iPad and iPhone Truth for Life with Alistair Begg, City Church Tallahassee with Dean and Sarah, and then Summit Church, J.D. Greer. Those are some pastors that I listen to their sermons regularly. So how about you guys? You listen to any podcast?
Yeah, I don't listen to a ton of them, but a few that I do. I listen to The Briefing with Al Mohler. I listen to Office Ladies. If you don't know what that is, it is the show The Office, and it is characters or actors from the show that get together to do commentary of each of the episodes. So big Office fan, so I do listen to The Office ladies. And then also I listen to a lot of the Gospel Coalition podcasts. They just put out daily sermons, devotionals, leadership podcasts. So every day I'm kind of looking on there to see what's new and anything I felt want to listen to it. But
Benny, are you a podcast fan?
I'm not much of a podcast fan. Now, leadership-wise, I do like a lot of John Maxwell's stuff. He does a lot of really good stuff in leadership. So he's a fan of mine. I also like, for spiritual, I like Louis Giglio and Passion Church. I love listening to some of his stuff, and Chris Tomlin and some of those guys that are there at Passion. So.
Yeah. And again, we would love to hear from you on Facebook. Hey, put your favorite podcast in the comments. Maybe that would be good for our souls and for someone else who is listening. So we would love to hear from you. Write that in the comments so we can grow from what God is doing in your life. Who is your favorite, or who or what is your favorite podcast?